Welcome to our podcast, proudly brought to you by VPA Australia, our trusted supplement provider since Unity Gym started. As sponsored athletes, we're excited to offer you a special 10% discount on top quality supplements that ship worldwide. Just use our discount code from the description. To avoid international shipping fees, contact VPA and tell them we sent you to get a flat shipping rate. Today's episode is also sponsored by the Flexibility Blueprint. Ever felt lost in the sea of social media fitness advice? The Flexibility Blueprint is your map to progress, designed to help you get laser focused on what matters most for your journey in flexibility and strength. And guess what? It's free. Grab it using the link in the description. If you're starting your flexibility journey, don't miss our 20-minute mobility routine. It's your first step to quick wins in flexibility. For those further along, use our Flexibility Masterclass, featuring advanced techniques like loaded stretching and end range strength for the pancake, front splits, middle splits, and more. Links for both are also in the description. And for the seasoned athletes, avoid the frustration of complex training puzzles with our UMS Tribe membership. It's a different online coaching experience with strength and flexibility combined. Don't forget, we're Amazon affiliates too. You can find all the equipment used in our videos and podcasts at the most competitive prices with our affiliate links in the description. Now let's dive into today's episode. Today we're talking slap tears, and more specifically, is it normal if you feel pain when you're doing resistance training in the gym trying to fix your slap tear? Is that bad? Is it bad if you feel a little bit of pain the next day? We've got our resident physiotherapist, Phil White, here with us to talk about this. And myself and my brother Yani have both had slap tears, and we've rehabilitated them without surgery. And a huge part of that was Phil White. Phil was there guiding me along, and fortunately for me, when I was going through my slap tear recovery, Phil was in the gym training with me every day. So I was able to bounce these questions off Phil in real time and get a real physio's, feedback from it. So I understand that if you've got a slap tear and you don't have that connection with a physiotherapist, that it can be quite scary when you're in the gym and you're pushing weights. But Phil's here to talk you through it. So before we get into it, how are you going, guys?
Off camera, we were just sharing a little bit about how we're going and
how old we all are and how we're all.
Last couple of weeks, we've been talking about, and I've been writing blogs about how important my workouts were to get through without hurting myself, and how it was such a, management of expectations and ambition based on having a bit of a slow start to the year. And one of the things I've been reincorporating into my routine, which I haven't spoken that much about, is boxing again, because I really enjoy it as a means of cardiovascular exercise and strength and conditioning. And yeah, yesterday I felt like I had a little bit of steam to blow off going to the gym. And I, as a boxer, your body really needs to be conditioned. Any sort of sport, if you were playing any sort of contact sport, you lose that conditioning really quickly. And it's been a very slow and gradual process as in my mid 40s to build up that conditioning again, so that I can hit a heavy bag as hard as I can physically hit a heavy bag. So yesterday I kind of gave it about 90% effort for the very first time in maybe 10 years. And yeah, I feel like I've been hit by a car today. I think every square inch of my body is hurting in some way, some more than others. My intercostals and around my ribs and all of the sides down here are oblique. So I have major DOMs. My lats have major DOMs. My shoulders and my rotator cuff on both sides have quite severe DOMs. But yeah, look, it is what it is. And on the back of that, I've been incorporating a lot more skipping. In our UMS program, we do 60 seconds of high intensity cardio to get the heart rate up and saturate the joints with synovial fluid and all these things. And at the very start of our warm up, and I've been using skipping as that. And I've wanted to get back to where I was when I was competitively boxing with my skipping skill, doing crossovers and double unders and all that sort of thing. So I've done it a lot, and I've sort of given myself early stages of probably what you would call shin splints. I don't know, maybe Phil can explain more in what that is if we have time, but it's just pain in the lower legs, basically.
Did you see that guy break the world record of I guess it's not double unders if you do 8 under the 8 rotations, but yeah, this guy did October, octuple under
unders.
the other day.
Did you
Absolutely
see?
insane.
Talking about news, that's incredible. But
Yeah, the
tragedy.
marathon runner.
The
Yeah,
marathon runner died in a
no.
car accident. I can't believe it. Just after breaking the Boston Marathon world record,
Well,
right? Or
doing the whole
record.
like the world record.
He broke the
Yeah,
marathon world record,
Wow.
like
yeah,
smashed it. Yeah. Oh, that is so
yeah. And
tragic.
he's only 24, and usually it takes a little while for the long distance runners to really season and kind of get to that
Peak,
prime. So the fact that he was
exactly.
there at 24,
Yeah.
yeah, he had so much potential, and it's just tragic.
Yeah, absolutely. And him and his coach passed away in
Yeah.
that car accident. You know,
Wow, that's horrible.
so tragic. Yeah.
All right,
absolutely.
well let's try to steer away from too much tragedy and stay on point.
Well,
So what sparked this podcast is that in our UMS tribe membership, we have a lot of people that are coming in because they've had slap tears and they've seen my video on YouTube for slap tears. If you want to check it out, we can put a link in the description of this podcast, or you can go to YouTube and search for slap tear rehab explained, workout included. And that video really breaks down what a slap tear is and the general rehabilitation process that I followed that worked so well for me for a slap tear in both shoulders. And now we've got all these people that have watched those videos, they've come into the UMS, and we've got people that are like just frothing at the results that they're having. We've got people that have been training with physiotherapists and seeing doctors and a lot of different people to help treat their slap
We've got
tears.
physiotherapists that have been training.
We do, actually. We do. We have physiotherapists
getting
in there that are
remarkable
learning from it.
results.
And that have not been able to fix the pain associated with their slap tears. And now within a matter of months, like literally a matter of some people as little as 1 month, some people 3 months, their pain is completely gone and they're now doing things that they've never done before. But that said, there's plenty of people that are in their first week, 2, 3, 4, and they're messaging me saying, Rad, I feel a bit of pain when I do this exercise. Is it normal? And then we've got another question for Phil, which is, we'll address them separately, which is, I feel pain for the next couple of days. Is that normal? So Phil, want to throw it over to you. Someone's in, they're doing, these exercises that you showed me, like they're doing reduced range of motion. They're starting with things like dumbbell floor press, bent over row, like these medicine ball activation drills and stuff. It's all pretty safe stuff, but they're saying, I'm feeling a little bit of pain and it's scaring me. Is that normal?
Yeah, so I'm going to start out with my signature disclaimer here. So again, like make sure that if you think you have a slap tear or if you're diagnosed, like do work with a professional on this. It's really like if you haven't had it fully assessed, just make sure you do and do take this is like general guidance because everyone's got such specific situation, anatomy, things around pain. So like, yeah, just to really cover myself here, make sure that you're working with a professional. But the thing to think about with a slap tear is basically that, there's so many different types. I've actually got like 8 different classifications of what different types, but the basic idea is that you've got a damage to the cartilage that sits inside the acetabulum. The glenoid fossa in the shoulder. The acetabulum's a hip, and it's adding a bit of extra contact surface for the head of the humerus to sit inside that ball and socket. It's also an attachment site for your bicep, so it is very common to get like a bicep related pain with this. And so when you do have a tear of this, it is actually a tear of that cartilage. So I think hearing you talk about the idea of fixing it, I like to, like in the introduction you said fix, but in the just then you're talking about fixing the pain. And I think that's a really important distinction because with a cartilage
tear, I corrected myself there.
It's very unlikely that you basically almost certainly will not fix the cartilage tear unless you go in and have surgery and put it back in place. But that doesn't mean that you can't have full function, full pain-free range and strength. It just means that there's a disconnect between fixing the cartilage itself and then also your full function. So a really important one there to get in your head. So and the thing about with cartilage injuries is that with how we think about rehabbing them is basically like if you're in the acute stage, you certainly want to let things go. So when I say acute, like if you have had a type 2 tear, so the type 1 is a degenerative, so it's like basically like kind of arthritis in your knee. People sort of understand that, like you do get that, the breaking down of cartilage if you haven't kind of looked after the cartilage. And often people think it's all running and impact and all these things are going to inherently break it down, but the cartilage is something that responds to stress and can grow and develop and stay strong. if you dose it appropriately. But all those things aside, so the type 1 is basically a degenerative type, but the more common is probably the acute slap tear, and that's often when you're falling on an outstretched arm, or for me, like as you said in the intro, you both have had slap tears, and so have I. So it's definitely something we're all painfully familiar with. But yeah, mine was from someone barging into me
the
while
slap
playing
tear
sport.
club.
Yeah, slap club. Yeah, and my shoulder subluxing and tearing the cartilage there. So the important thing to remember is like acute management versus kind of chronic management is a bit different. So if you are in that acute phase, like you really want to be, and generally that's up to sort of, between 6 weeks, depending on the severity, and 3 months. In that stage, you want to have it assessed. You want to make sure that you know if it's one that definitely does need surgery, because some can be, very severe, and you'll want to have that reattached. And it depends on your outcomes as well, like what you're looking for, because in the sort of research around non-surgical management, like outcomes aren't great if you're going back to a throwing sport, basically the same idea with boxing as well. If you're doing anything where you've got this real speed of movement, it's unlikely that you'll have great outcomes to be at the highest level of that. So you want to, in that early stage, really assess it, figure out the type and the severity. And then now what I'm going to be talking about is more in that kind of chronic management. So once you've decided you don't want to go for, or either your surgery is in, not immediate, and preoperative, you're doing preoperative exercise, or you want to give it a test of like a year or two to see if you can manage it without surgery, or if you've just decided to go non-surgical, that's the stage we're talking about. So does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very, very valuable, Phil. Great information.
Yeah, because when you guys had the injuries, did you initially, were you going back and forth about deciding on surgery or not, or were you?
No, surgery was never even an option for me. And this is my personal opinion, so take this with a grain of salt. But I, having talked enough to you, Phil, and also to Nilesh and Leroy, which are other sports physio friends of ours as well, both who mentored Phil. My opinion is that surgery is really the last resort for somebody like me. For what I want to be able to do, I am not a competitor. I don't have this limited window of opportunity to be, the best that I can be before I retire. For me, it's about longevity. And the thought process for me is that the surgery is not even necessarily going to make symptoms better, and it's always an option that you can get surgery later, but you can never undo it. So for me, even when I found out that I had a slap tear, I didn't even go and see a surgeon. I didn't even talk to one. I just came and talked to you, and I talked to Leroy for the first slap tear, and then I talked to you, and I talked to Nilesh for the second one, because that was just based on who I had access to at the time.
I had gone through the process of seeking surgery because I had a thought process back then that it would have been my first surgical intervention. And when you have never had surgery before, this is my opinion anyway, this is not based on anything else other than anecdotal experience, which is personal experience. I think you don't quite contemplate that surgery might not be 100% successful when you have never had surgical intervention before. And so my initial thought was, okay, I just need to go and get this operated on to get it fixed 100%. And when the doctor, I saw a sports doctor who's very, very good, she said, the only way you'll fix the cartilage, as Phil just explained, is with surgery. You can't, the cartilage won't heal on its own. And I had a pretty bad slap tear where I had torn the entire anterior portion of the labrum off. So it was a big tear. And so my mind was, okay, I need to go for surgery. So I went and saw a surgeon. He tried to book me in 2 weeks, but I thought, no, I'm going to get a few different. Luckily, I had the input from Dr. Tony Battaji, who's a close friend who we've had on the podcast a couple of times with Phil. And he said, look, my advice is to get at least 3 opinions from different surgeons. And he'd given me the best surgeon, but that guy was the hardest to get in. I had to wait, I think it was maybe 3 weeks just to get an appointment with him. So I saw 3 surgeons, and they all said, yep, I can get you in next week. You 100% need a shoulder reconstruction. This is what we're going to do. Explained it all to me. And I waited until I got to go and see this surgeon. I can't remember his name. It could have been Tom Cross or someone like that. And anyway, long story short, he took a look at me and said, what are your goals? What are your goals? What do you want to get out of this? Are you going to be a baseball pitcher with your left arm? Are you going? And at the time I was boxing competitively. And he said, yeah, look, boxing, it probably warrants getting it fixed. But if you don't think you're going to compete at a really high level, then, you may consider opting for rehab exercise, because you're a big, strong guy. You're obviously already highly active and working out regularly. So we don't have to worry about you building a new routine of exercise. I would advise that you go and do 3 months of strength building under the guidance of a good physiotherapist. And he made a referral, which is how I met Leroy Lobo, who's one of our all mutual friends for the three of us and a great physiotherapist. And he said, the thing is, he was the only surgeon out of all 4 that I saw that said it's not a guaranteed solution. Like, I have a very high success rate with this surgery. And they were talking about quite a new technology at the time where they actually use these little anchors to essentially hook the cartilage back to the bone. Phil can probably explain that much better, but at the time it was quite new. And it didn't have a whole heap of historical sort of data to show that it was really long-term successful. And he said, yeah, look, that's what we would do. It's got a pretty good success rate, but we're going to be cutting into your shoulder and we're going to be cutting through a lot of muscle tissue, and all of that has an impact on your physical mobility, your physical strength. And then there is a big rehab process after the surgery that you need to take into consideration. So why don't we, there's no rush here. You're not competing in a boxing event in a year's time that you have to be ready for. Why don't we go down the path of 3 months of physio-guided rehabilitation, working with someone like Phil? In this case, it was a different person who I ended up, I think, meeting. Oh, no, I didn't. That's a different story. Anyway, and then come back in 3 months and let's revisit and see how you go, which was a real a game changer for me. That completely, for the rest of my life, changed my outlook on surgery. And yeah, we were able to achieve what he suggested and what Phil just said there. We were able to achieve full function in the shoulder without surgery. And then when I went back to see him in 12 weeks, he said, well, why do you want the surgery now? And I said, well, I guess I don't. And he said, all right, see you later. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it. The other 3 surgeons were so keen to book me in and get me done under the knife. And, then a few years later, and I'll quickly share this and then we'll get back onto it. A few years later, I had a really pretty bad soccer collision, football for those people in Europe. In America and Australia, we tend to call it soccer, where I had a large player slide into the side of my leg. Arguably, I put my leg in front of him and he hit it, but it dislocated my knee and I needed a knee reconstruction. And I opted to this time go for the surgery because it tore my ACL. It was a grade 3 ACL tear, meaning that there was no attachment at all. The tendon had retracted fully and was not doing anything. And then, oh, look at that. And then I also had my MCL damage, but it wasn't grade 3. It was only grade 2. So there was still a little bit of fiber holding on. And the meniscus had been damaged a little bit on that medial side, on the inside as well. And so, yeah, I sort of consulted with the same people, and yeah, they suggested that that I could do the same thing, that I could build strength, but it just didn't feel right at the time. And I opted to go in for the surgery. I waited for the best surgeon, who was arguably the best knee surgeon, orthopedic surgeon for knees in this country. And I was able to delay the surgery by 6 months to get in with him. And yeah, look, I'll be honest, the knee's never been good since, despite having a really positive outcome from the surgery by all, physical markers. When I've gone back and had MRIs, the ligament that I had a hamstring graft where they take a portion of the hamstring, they harvest a portion of the hamstring and create a new ACL, sort of drill a shaft through the bone. I won't go into too much detail, but they string it through and it replaces the old ACL that was no longer there. And Yeah, I've had issues with the knee ever since. It's never come good. I can't do a
Yeah,
lot of
and
distance
since then,
running.
there's been a lot of more interest in the kind of non-surgical management of ACLs, and that's kind of come along. Like back when you had that injury, I think that was pretty unusual to do, but now it is a thing. And there's definitely some, like, it's not perfect. Like you definitely need to really be on. It would be only for someone who's really staying on top of their exercise and really, aware of their limitations in terms of what they might be able to do. But yeah, I think it's just a really interesting thing that a lot of people aren't really aware of, the idea that you can manage without some of these structures that just seem like they're so essential to function. And I think kind of thinking about that to try and help people understand why it is possible to function with damaged cartilage or completely torn ligaments is, if you think about the ligaments and the cartilage as these passive structures of the body, they're there as our like backup systems and cushioning systems that ideally we want to try and not have to rely on too much load there. So the muscles can control the joint and can do that job really quite effectively if we're in good range of motion with a kind of level of intensity and load that we can control. That's why with throwers, as we said before, often don't do quite as well without the labor movers, because you're going into that complete end of range of motion at speed where you're kind of pushing past what the muscle's controlling, and you're actively trying to kind of inhibit the like slowing down of your arm and just trying to get it whipping as quickly as possible. And so that's where you really need those passive structures to kind of play that back up and hold things in place. So yeah, it's important to kind of realize that these cartilage, ligaments, joint capsules, all these things are obviously very important, and ideally we'd all have perfect pristine ones. But if we can utilize our muscular support systems really well, then a lot of the time we're able to unload those structures and not aggravate them and not need them.
Awesome. And I want to get a
so to get into the pain side of things.
Well,
and
yeah,
how
a specific answer for our members. Yeah. So if like we've gone through the generalization of all of this now, and we've given our disclaimers. So for those who are in there and they're doing these, routines for the first time, and they're like, Rad, I feel some pain in my shoulder when I'm doing this exercise. Is that okay? And then I always ask them, is it getting worse the next day? How are you able to progress? And they say, no, it's fine. It's just when I do this one exercise, it hurts me a little bit. And then when I look at their form and their technique, and they post a video, it's always really good. They're always doing great work, and they're doing really light weights. Like one that's quite common that people ask about, Phil, if I'm specific, is a supine flat tricep extension. So they're laying flat on their back and they've got their arm up at 90 degree and they're doing that tricep extension, and they say that they feel a bit of pain and discomfort when they're doing that, and they're literally doing like 1 kilogram or 2 pounds for those of you over in America.
Yeah, sure. So the thing to consider with pain is, again, like we've done pain science episodes before, but I think it is important to just quickly frame that like pain is your brain's perceived threat. It's an expression of perceived threat. So there's going to be some level of it is the information coming from the nerve structure around the area. And so cartilage isn't particularly innervated, or the areas around it would have more nerves, but we don't have pain nerves as per se. We have ones that can be stimulated by damage and chemical changes of the structure around it and inflammation. We can have temperature, sensation, touch, all these other sensors, but we don't have a particular pain sensor. So important to kind of realize there that like that pain is not directly related to damage, because I think that's why people kind of get caught up and think, okay, there's no way I can possibly do this exercise, because if pain equals damage, then if I'm doing this exercise, then I'm causing further damage, and therefore like I need to stop doing anything and rest. Whereas it's really important to understand that relationship, just so we don't like stop yourself from doing anything. So I think that's like the main reason why people end up completely deconditioned, is they wait until things are pain free, and sure enough, it's never pain free. And when you stop doing things for more than 2 weeks, particularly once you're like 30 plus, and you start to naturally decline in strength and muscle mass and all these things, and particularly as you get older and older, like that really rapidly increases. So the more time you take out of it, the more you decondition, and then you try and get back to what you used to do, and it's just a bit of a nightmare. So it's really key to try and figure out what level of pain is acceptable, and that's obviously what we're doing here now. But realizing that it isn't this linear relationship of if it's painful, therefore it is doing damage. So, and as I said, like with the cartilage not really having lots of innovation, it's often more the sort of structures around it that are going to be signaling that things aren't quite happy there. So that's even more of a sign of like if we can get the muscles to control keeping the ball basically centered in the socket, then things are going to be okay. So again, with the muscles and their job, and the labrum in its job is to try and keep that ball centered in the socket, so it's not coming up against the other bony structures and sliding around. Because as I've talked about before in other podcasts, like your muscles aren't smart; they can contract or relax. So if a pec muscle was to contract, you'd basically, if you had no other muscles there on the skeleton, you would get what the pec does, which is bringing your arm up into that horizontal adduction position. So basically what you'd kind of look like in a chest fly, or the part of what your the upper arm's doing in a bench press. But you would also get an anterior dislocation of your shoulder. So if we didn't have other muscles there to control, like, you get that rotational movement of the horizontal adduction, but you also get a gliding motion. And so that's what the rotator cuff's job is to try and stop that glide from happening. And that's also what the labrum is there to do, is to try and keep that ball fairly centered, so our shoulders don't just slip out. So again, important to kind of understand that that's the role of the labrum, because if we can think, hey, what's the role of the labrum? Can we make sure that we're getting other structures to do that? And therefore, if we're not going to be moving around so much, if we're not going to be stimulating those structures that are aggravated when you get that glide, then we're likely to be in a better place. And so just on the again, going back to the pain, I know there's lots of other external information there, but I think the context is important. But the basic rule of thumb that I have with pain is a concept I've talked about a few times on the podcast called irritability. And that's basically, how intense is the pain, how quickly does it come on, and how quickly does it settle down. And so that, if you think about how intense it is like 0 to 10 on a, is it 10 out of 10 worst pain you ever felt in your life? How quickly does it come on? Is it immediately as soon as you're contracting a structure or in a position? Does that set it off? And how quickly does it settle down? So is it immediately gone as soon as you're out of that position? Or is it lingering around for the rest of the day? Does it, hurt overnight and pop up the next day if you've used it before? So those three things give us this idea of it's irritability. And basically, the more irritable something is, the more we want to be protective of that aggravating movement or load. And then the less irritable it is, then the more we can kind of give it a nudge. And so typically in the acute phase of an injury, so if you've, it's like on the weekend, I was just telling the guys that he rolled my ankle on a uneven footpath, and when I was just walking my baby in the pram, and like I literally did an ultra marathon over mountains, and calf deep in a river with stones, and I'm missing 2 of my ankle ligaments. Another example of how you can function quite well without ligaments, because I've built up so much like coordination and proprioception and muscular strength around my stability structures. But bloody walking down a pathway in the eastern suburbs, I managed to
you might think I'm cruel laughing, but we were all making jokes about the amount of stuff that Phil's done in ultra marathons and Ironman triathlon events. He can't walk on an uneven surface.
Mate, such a killer. But when it's in this acute phase, like the irritability is really high, because you've got all these inflammatory mediators coming to the space. You've got very exposed nerve endings of areas. So you're going to get really intense pain. It's going to come on quickly. And if I put it the wrong way at the moment, that pain lingers for a long time. So those kind of things you want to be thinking about when you're doing these exercises. Like if it's really intense, coming on as soon as you're there, and then it's like hanging around for a long time afterwards, you really want to be careful of that. But I'm sure you've all experienced like when you might get some weird pains every now and again where it comes on quick and it bloody hurts, and it comes on immediately, but then goes away immediately, and then it doesn't really come back. So I don't know. I'm not sure if that's
I think, Phil, I think that what a lot of these people are struggling with, and what I certainly struggled with in the earlier stages for me, is what the understanding of the difference between discomfort and pain is. Because I remember I used to ask you these questions, and when, I'd be sitting there and I'd be doing this and I'd say, it's a little bit uncomfortable. And you'd ask me all these questions and you'd go, well, you're lifting about like 20 or 30% of what you used to lift before you did this injury. Like, I think it's pretty safe for you. Like, for example, I was doing, 100 kilogram bench presses or 220 pounds for, sets of 5 reps. And then all of a sudden now I'm doing an unloaded barbell, which is 20 kilos or 44 pounds. And it's feeling uncomfortable. And I'm asking Phil all about it. And he asked me all these series of questions. And he said, look, things are going to feel uncomfortable like this, but how is this progressing over a week? How long does it linger for? And my experience was, at first I was quite afraid of a lot of movements, but what I found was that I'd do something that was uncomfortable. It wasn't painful. It wasn't that sharp, aggravating pain. And it was something that would maybe linger for a little bit after the workout, but the next day it would feel okay. And then if I kept doing that movement, my body would adapt to it. And then I would increase the range of motion that I was doing. So, for example, start by pressing in this range of motion, and then progress towards progressing in this range of motion, and then eventually like this. And then eventually I was doing behind the head shoulder press. And in the earlier phases of a slap tear, like I couldn't even get my arm to, like I couldn't even lift my arm to there, let alone being able to even grip a barbell in a behind the head position. And the first time I did a behind the head press, it was like, oh God, it was really uncomfortable to get down there. But learning to understand that discomfort was a part of the journey was absolutely what got me back to where I am.
So just to be like actionable about what the difference is with I don't know, pain and discomfort here. Like, I'm not sure if there is something like between discomfort and pain, except for maybe just how intense it is. Like that's probably the only difference there. And there's different sensations, as you said, like between a sharp kind of thing and more of like a restriction tightness, like when you got a swollen knee and it's just a bit swollen but not mega painful. So there's a few things there, but I think the one to be really aware of is that how long does it linger? So if it's intense and it lingers for a long time, and you're sort of getting this like it's really sticking around, and by the time you even try and do the next exercise, like it's still there, and the next day it's still there, like that's the one that I'd be really more careful of, because as I said before, like sometimes you do get these sort of sharp shooting pains that if you can't reproduce it and it goes away immediately, not as concerned. Obviously if it's in that injured shoulder, we want to be a bit more careful, but yeah, it's really that lingering one that I'm generally looking out for, because that's probably the sign of like your aggravating structure to the point of like getting some level of re-inflammation of that area, and the structures aren't liking it. So that'd be the one I'd be careful of. And just to kind of look at what you were saying about I guess the rehab strategy with the person being in that position of doing a supine tricep extension with very little weight. Like it's often the case that people will jump to decreasing intensity as being the way to make an exercise easier, and that rehab should always be like super low intensity. But again, I've talked about this on a few podcasts, but if you think about those 5 variables of strength training, so intensity, volume, range of motion, speed of contraction, and then complexity, then or variations, then we want to like really identify which of those are the aggravating factors there, because people always jump to intensity, but so often, if like particularly for a cartilage thing, if it's not a muscular contraction, then there's no reason, like by making it heavier, like you're not putting more force on those muscles. It's more about the position that then aggravates the shoulder. So as Brad was just saying there, with like the rehab approach that we took, it was like really starting in a smaller range of motion, building up strength, building up control in a balanced way, and then gradually over time exposing it to more and more range of motion to the point of being in that most aggravating, generally aggravating position of the behind the head shoulder press. But it's, I think of all the things, like that really is the most important, particularly in cartilage and joint related stuff, is like range of motion is almost always going to be the the factor that is the most painful. Whereas if you had like a muscle tear, if you really load up the intensity, and you can imagine if you got a tear there, then like range of motion is probably fine, but the intensity is not. But yeah, that range of motion is really key.
Yeah. And I'm going to throw this out there for anybody who is wanting to come along and check out the rehab programs that we customize for our members. You can go to unitygym.com/UMS and you can do a free trial of the UMS. For anybody that's already in the UMS and that wants to connect with Phil, or anybody that just wants to go straight to connecting with Phil, Phil does online physio consultations. And my understanding of what physiotherapy was before working with Phil was quite naive, I should say. I really thought that physiotherapy was all about like massage and things like that. And my experience of working with Phil, I've had Phil give me sports massages, and it was more of a sort of a maintenance type thing. I never really got sports massages for injuries. But when I had my slap tears, every bit of work that I did with Phil was communication, and I was in the same room as him, but it was just communication. He would be asking me to move and asking me what my experience was, and then giving me advice that would then direct my programming. And I cannot tell you how valuable that was. And if you're, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, except unfortunately the United States of America due to insurance clashes. But wherever you are in the world, if you feel that you want some really customized advice and tailored advice, and if you've gone out and you've had a diagnosis that you can share, then doing a session with Phil would be very, very valuable. It really, really would, because I absolutely agree with what Phil said at the start of this, that if you have a serious shoulder injury, then be careful how much of your advice you get from listening to podcasts and watching YouTube. There definitely comes a time where you need to work with a professional, and it's something I did. I went and got an MRI, and I took that MRI to Phil, and I worked with a couple of physios to get to where I am now. So just going to throw that out there.
Getting that initial assessment, like a scan is often really good in these stages, just to know what you're dealing with, because it's a slap tear. As I said, there's like 8 different classifications, and it can really matter which one you've got about and your particular circumstances. So
and where can people connect with you, Phil? How can they
my website is philwhite.me, or at Phil White Physio on the socials.
Awesome.
But I started my career as a massage therapist. I did a massage diploma and worked in massage for a decade, and I was so sure I was going to get like magic hands that would cause healing and fixing of tissues. But definitely over time came to realize that while it is good for helping people like facilitate their training, when it comes to like an injury and getting past it, it's like the main thing that matters is trying to do as much as you possibly can exercise wise in the presence of the injury. Like you want to be conditioning yourself as much as possible while that injury has a chance to heal, because at the end of the day it really is time and good recovery, so sleep, nutrition, stress management, all these things, plus support of other structures that makes the biggest difference long term.
Yep.
And that's pretty good online.
Thanks so much, Phil. Thanks for your time. Thanks, Yani. And I hope you guys got something out of this. If you've got any questions, of course, put them in the comments, and we will see you in our next episode.